Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. It should probably go without saying that an album review is ultimately just one individual's personal opinion. I've reviewed a number of albums here on this channel and I've shared my opinions on those albums. And in almost every case, I've had viewers leave comments saying that they disagree with my opinion. And that's fine. We don't have to all like the same things or dislike the same things. I'm not claiming to be right, even when some viewers blast me and say that I'm wrong. Either way, I think the dude said it best when he said, "That's just like your opinion, man." But when it comes to articulating my opinion on an album and applying some kind of rank, I think it's important to use some kind of structure or at least a loose criteria. That's pretty common in reviews, of course. Think back to probably the most famous movie reviewers of all time. When Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert reviewed a film, they gave it either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. They were offering a simple answer to a simple question. Is this movie worth your time? Yes or no? Of course, they didn't stick strictly to that rating system. Some movies got a big thumbs up or thumbs way up. As much as I respected those guys, I have to say that the thumbs up or down method got a little ambiguous at times. Well, what about the star system? That's what Rolling Stone magazine uses. If you look at their album reviews, you'll see that they rank them on a 5-star scale. They also allow half stars, which means that between 0 and 5 stars, there's 11 possible ways that an album can rank. Generally speaking, I think that offers a reasonable level of flexibility. But one of the inherent problems of the star rating system is also perfectly illustrated by Rolling Stone when you look at their movie reviews. Those also use a star rating system, but it's a maximum of 4 stars, not 5. That means that when you look at the magazine's year-end lists of the best movies and music, the best album of the year may get 5 stars, whereas the best film would only get 4 stars. Now, obviously, movies and albums are not an apples-to-apples comparison, but it can be pretty confusing when 2 reviews from a single source are using different grading scales. Speaking of grades, that's another popular method of reviewing media, and it's the one that Entertainment Weekly uses across the board for all of their reviews. Music, movies, TV, books, you name it. It's also a system that most people can relate to because chances are we've all been graded on this system ourselves. We understand that an A grade is the thing to strive for, whereas an F means we've failed. But grades are more complicated than that, of course. An A is great, but you know what's better? An A+, right? Or maybe if you weren't quite a solid A, you got an A-. You just missed the mark. But hey, it's still an A, right? Well, that depends on the teacher. You see, some teachers would say that an A- is the same as a B+, so that's a little unclear. But if for the sake of argument a B+ is not the same as an A- and we get a plus or minus grade all the way down to an F, and if we assume that an F is just an F, no plus or minus, that puts us on a grade scale with 13 possibilities, which is quite a lot. Then consider this. What is a passing grade? When I was in school, I could get a D and technically still pass a class. And what about percentages? Letter grades are usually based on a percentage scale, with an A being between 90 and 100% and an F being anything below 60%. But if we lump 60% of all activity under a single letter grade, aren't we vastly generalizing the majority of the grading scales, substandard as that activity may be? And remember earlier when I talked about reviews being opinions and not a matter of being right or wrong? Well, isn't that usually the opposite of what letter grades represent? When you take a multiple choice test, your grade represents how many of the questions you got right. Your opinion isn't relevant if it doesn't match the right answers. And if you want to get an A, it's as simple as that. Just answer all the questions right. And what about extra credit? Okay, let's just not go there. So as you can see, using a letter grading system is a bit problematic, but the underlying percentage system has merit, I think, if applied appropriately. And that's ultimately the way ratings work when you use a 1 to 10 scale. This is probably the most common system of ranking, and it's also the one that I use on this channel. What I like about it, when used properly, is it allows for a broad spectrum of opinion, ranging from an album being utter garbage at the bottom of the scale up to ranking among the best of all time at the top of the scale. The problem is, as widely used as the 10 scale may be, there's still a lot of disparity in how those numbers should be interpreted. I've reviewed albums that I've rated a 7 out of 10 and had people leave comments like, "Are you kidding? This album is a 10 for sure." And I read that comment and I think, Really? Do you really think that this is one of the best albums of all time? Right up there with Dark Side of the Moon and Sgt. Pepper's? You're saying that this album is equal to Nevermind by Nirvana? Because in my mind, that's what a 10 is. And isn't that what the top of any scale should be? Isn't that what artists should be striving for? Isn't that the level at which the bar should be set? But the truth of the matter is, most artists don't set out to make an album that equals those all-time classics. They're just trying to make good music. And in my mind, good music lives a few pegs down from those classics. And why shouldn't it? If we're talking about a 10 scale, I'd say the majority of album releases probably rank somewhere around the middle. They're fine, they're okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. If an album ranks a 6, I'd say that's a decent album. Of course, there's other factors involved with rating an album, not the least of which is listener expectations. Bands that have a history of releasing highly rated albums kind of raise the bar for themselves. We want to see them reach their potential or exceed it. Thus, an album that might rank an 8 by a lesser-known artist might only rank a 7 for a veteran act with a deep discography peppered with highly rated releases. Personally, I think that's fair. I think we should expect more from those acts, and that we shouldn't reward them for mediocrity. But that is a topic that we could do a whole other video about. So rather than go down that rabbit hole today, what I want to do is walk you through the 10 scale for ratings the way that I interpret it. And let's start right at the top. What is a 10? Well, as I said before, I think that the top of the scale should be reserved for what I'd call the classics. An album that ranks at 10 is one that merits inclusion among the best albums of all time. A classic is an album that may transcend genre, that'll be remembered for decades to come. It's an album that's not just great within the context of that artist's work, but also within the broader scope of all popular music. Does that sound like I'm setting the bar pretty high? You bet I am. That's how it should be. That's what it should take to rank a 10. An album that ranks a 9 is one that I'd call a masterpiece. This is an album that may very well be the pinnacle of an artist's career, the best work that they'll ever produce. Now, that's not to say that an artist can't have more than one masterpiece. They absolutely can, and that's something that I hope they always strive for. A masterpiece may also be an album that earns a place among the landmarks of a specific musical genre, an album that inspires similar artists and may change the direction of musical tastes and trends. It may even be an album that in some ways comes to define the time in which it is released. At the rank of 8, we're talking about an album that I'd describe as excellent. Bravo to the artist that creates an excellent album. This is one I'll probably be telling all my friends about. It may even be the best album of the year, certainly in the top 10. It's an album that I'd be hard-pressed to find anything to complain about beyond a few trivial nitpicks or annoyances. An album that I'd rank as a 7, I'd describe as very good. I really enjoy the majority of the tracks on this album, and I still find it mostly compelling after multiple listens. I'll probably be listening to this album fairly regularly for at least a month, or until something the same or better comes along. After that, I'll probably play it again a few times a year. Dropping down a notch to 6, we're talking about a good album. Have you heard the new album by such and such? How was it? I liked it. It was good. I got a couple of those songs on a playlist. There's a bunch of other tracks that are kind of filler, I guess, but overall the album works. Or you could just buy those 2 or 3 cool songs. An album that I'd rank as a 5 is okay, it's fine, maybe even It's an inoffensive batch of songs, most of which aren't especially memorable. Maybe it's a bit of a paint-by-numbers affair where the artist has checked all of the boxes and delivered an album that sounds the way you expect, but doesn't really break any new ground, and it might even feel a bit regressive. It's an album that doesn't inspire repeated listening, but rather it inspires you to go listen to the better albums by that artist instead. At the rank of 4, we're talking about albums that are disappointing. This is an album where you feel like the artist may just be phoning it in. The music not only lacks originality, it seems like it's either lazily rehashing music from past albums or trying to ape the sound of other artists. There's probably one song, the single, that you'd consider good maybe. Otherwise, the album is mostly a letdown. It could be worse though. It could be a 3. This is a bad album. Maybe it's boring and it's hard to listen to in its entirety. Or maybe the artist is blatantly phoning it in to the point of being offensive to their fans. Perhaps the lyrics are riddled with cliches and the production is sloppy and the whole thing feels like it could just be a money grab. Well, hopefully the artist has put out some really good music before, and this effort won't make you want to give up on them entirely. But if this is the only album that you've heard by them, you're certainly not eager to hear anything else. At the rank of 2, we're talking about a very bad album. This is a real stinker. You might be able to detect traces of promise or talent on this album, but it's overwhelmed by the weight of some really bad music. And not just bad, annoying. It may be almost impossible to listen to this entire album, and you're strongly tempted to give up on this artist entirely. You tell yourself you'll never listen to this album again. After some time passes, though, you ask yourself, was it really that bad? So you put the album on again, and before you're even halfway through, you shut it off. Yep, it's still that bad. And that brings us all the way down to 1. Just like I set the bar super high for 10, it's only appropriate to have 1 be the exact opposite. An album that ranks as 1 is terrible. This is an album that has pretty much nothing redeeming about it. We almost never see albums this awful because most record labels would never allow an artist to release something this offensively bad. But there's nothing to stop an independent artist from putting out an album's worth of hot garbage on their own, whether they're an unsigned indie act or a superstar with enough clout to quit their label and self-release a musical train wreck. This is about as bad as it gets. Well, maybe. Just maybe, an album could rank as low as a 0. What's worse than terrible? I'll go with worthless. I can't even describe how bad this would have to be. The name says it all. Worthless. Nothing of any value whatsoever. So there you go, a complete breakdown of my 10-scale rating system. And I know that some reviewers use a 10 scale and sometimes vacillate between numbers. A light 7, a high 6. That's kind of getting into the whole B-, C+ thing again, if you ask me. I think a 10 scale gives you a pretty solid and defined structure without having to blur any lines. And by the way that I've defined this scale should be easily transferable to reviewing other media. The same style of ranking could easily apply to movies or TV or books or whatever. Now, the last thing that I want to leave you with is to keep in mind that when it comes to reviewing and rating albums or movies or whatever, it's about quality, not quantity. And what I mean by that is that the number of albums sold is not a measure of the quality of that album. I posted a negative review of an album last year, and someone posted a comment saying that since the album went to the top of the sales charts, I must be wrong. But really, those first few weeks of sales have very little to do with whether or not the album was any good. Die-hard fans will always flock to an artist's album the week it gets released. If the album is truly good or very good or excellent and so on, it'll probably continue to sell well for many weeks to follow. Not always, of course. I can think of dozens of albums that rate quite high that never reach the sales levels that I think they deserve. Of course, I can also think of hundreds of mediocre albums that went platinum. So, as they say, there's no accounting for taste. But hey, that's just like my opinion, man. Once again, my name is Kyle, and this is Track by Track. If you like this video, be sure to give it an ironic thumbs up. Plus, be sure to check out some of these other videos down here that I think you might also dig. And, of course, be sure to subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.